Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Selma susilawati. I am from 5 group. Now I will to explain the material about true experimental. So before that, we know about the quantitative method, right? In this quantitative method, there are experiments, and one of the experiment is true experimental. The definition of true experimental. True experimental is the type of research that has the most accurate design than the others, and the true experimental has the criteria. The first having two groups, control group and experimental group, and the second, in this experiment, the researchers also manipulate variable, and the third, random assignment. So participant selection is randomly. Strength and weakness. Strength of the true experimental is high internal validity. It assures that dependent variable is influenced by independent variable. And the weakness of true experimental is low internal validity. So, if there are research, automatically a research is not focused on one. It could be the result become B or C. True experimental design. The design of true experimental has a two design. The first, the randomized pretest, post-test, control group design, and the second, the randomized post-test only control design. And now I will give you an example from the first design. In true experimental have two group, experiment group and control group. Experiment group is those who receive treatment, and control group is doesn't receive treatment. For the example, can you see a picture in my video? The researchers are conducting experiment to improve speaking skill through role play. The first step, experiment group and control group has the same step. Then the researchers selected random participant. After that, the researchers gave a pretest to experiment group and control group. And in here, there are differences between experiment group and control group. If experiment group with treatment or role play, but in control group without treatment. And after that, the researchers give post-test to the two group, experiment group and control group. And finally, we can see the conclusion. Does the speaking skill improve because of treatment? And compare with post-test score from control group. And let's see the result. So the control group in here is the same as for the comparison group. I think that's all for me. The next material will be delivered by my best friend. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Adinda Suci. As the second speaker, will continue the presentation. Now we will continue to the types of true experimental design. Let's get started. Here there are two types of true experimental design. The first pre and post-test design, and second post-test only design. Here the table. I will explain that. Before, we need to know what the difference is between control group and experimental group. True experiments must have a control group, which is a group of research participants that resemble the experimental group but don't receive the experimental treatment. The experimental group is the group of research participants who receive the experimental treatment, and true experiments must have at least one control group and one experimental group, though it is possible to have more than one experimental group. The first is pre-test and post-test design. Here the table. First, the control and the experimental group are formed. Then, both groups are pre-test for the independent variable. After that, only experimental group receives the treatment. And finally, both groups are post-test to investigate the effects of the independent variable on the dependent one. For information, independent variable is a variable that the researcher has control over. But the outcome effect that the researcher is studying is called dependent variable. The dependent variable is also called outcome variable. The last, post-test only design. Here the table. In this type of design, there are two randomly assigned groups, namely as control group and an experimental group. None of these groups are pre-test before the implementation of the treatment. The treatment is applied just to the experimental group, and the post-test is carried out on both groups to measure the effect of the treatment. When it is not possible to pre-test the subject, this type of design is commonly used.
So,
Hello, my name is Gulam Hafiz Nurulhaq, and now I will talk about quasi-experimental. As we know before, that quasi-experiment designed a lot like a true experiment, except that in the quasi-experimental design, the participants are not randomly assigned experimental groups. Quasi-experiments are employed when the researcher is interested in independent variables that cannot be randomly assigned. Please underline that. Cannot be randomly assigned. Cannot. Okay, in examples, to make it clear, studying a new math program may require using existing fourth grade classes and designating one as the true group and one as the control group. Randomly assigning students to the two groups would disrupt classroom learning. That's all for me, and for the next slide will be explained or presented by Eef Saefurrohman. So to Eef Saefurrohman, time is yours.
Hi, my name is Eef Saefurrohman, and I'm as the last speaker. I will try to continue the previous material. Let's take a look at the table on the slide. We can apply the pre-test and the post-test design approach to quasi-experimental design. The researcher assigned to intact group the experimental and control treatment. Administer a pre-test to both group, conduct experimental treatment activities with the experimental group only, and administer a post-test to assess the differences between the two groups. A variation on this approach, similar to the true experiment, use only a post-test in the design. Next is when we use the quasi-experimental design, there is a strength and a weakness. The first is strength. No limitation. Okay, it means in using a quasi-experimental design, there are no limitation in selection of sample, and can control the truth of validation. And the weakness of this quasi-experimental design is no randomization. No randomization in grouping members in the experimental group or the control group, because it's different with true experimental that use randomization in making group. In another word, quasi-experimental is development of true experimental. That's all from our group. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.